All right, everybody. This next episode, episode 4, is going to be about two major things in Photoshop. First are layers, and second are selections. And having a good understanding of how each of these work is really important to pretty much everything else you do in Photoshop. So we're going to get going here in episode 1 and just get a general understanding of how layers work. So if we go in, I'm going to actually create new to start. I'm going to set up a custom document here. So I'm going to make mine 11 by 11. I'm going to drop the resolution down to something more like 200. Just for demonstration purposes, I would keep that up at 300 if I were going to print eventually. And then the color mode I'm going to be working with is 8-bit RGB. Background is transparent. Color profile, I'm going to leave as sRGB. And that should give us a massive range of color. I'm going to go create that in a second. And I've slightly adjusted my workspace here. So I'm going to take this back. I'm going to go Window, Workspace, and Reset Essentials. So this might be more like what you were seeing. And I'm going to minimize the far right panels. And now I've got, this is my scene. Because I'm going to be working with layers, we want to be able to show that there are different types of layers as well, but we don't manage those as such. Photoshop helps manage it based on what you are working on, what is your import data, what are the resources that you're pulling in, what are you creating for new items. So the first thing with layers that I'm going to do is actually pull this panel out, and you can see if I left click and hover over top of that side there, I will get that panel docked up here, which is kind of beneficial because you're using it all the time. Depends how much width you have on your screen. If you've got a very small 13-inch monitor, leaving it back down where it was is probably a good idea. So layers themselves, the first thing I would mention with layers is always rename your layers, because what you're putting onto the layers is going to be sometimes hard to see, and you want to quickly move around. Rename your layers. And that's just a matter of double clicking on the name itself. To create new layers, you can actually go to the bottom here of the layers panel. And if I click on the new layer button, you can see I could create as many new layers as I like. I'm not sure if it still works this way, but it used to be something like 99 layers is where it would max out at. And if you're getting up to 99 layers in your workflow, that gets a little tricky. Next thing we could talk about here is selecting layers. So layers can be chosen. Whichever layer is selected or highlighted, yours might show up in a gray, mine's blue. You can move them around or things like that as small groupings of. So layers can be chosen in kind of a Windows or a Mac OS type of sensibility, meaning that if I left click on one, it's going to be chosen. If I do Control or Command, it'll choose two. Or even if I want to choose different out of order, I can hold the Control or Command key. And then I can also do Shift key if I want to click and select a range. Deselecting layers is just by clicking down in the empty area of the panel itself. And we can then do things like this. We could take rename layer and we can actually move it around. So you can see it's going to highlight as you drag it around where it's going to land. It's just a left click and drag. Layers can also be deleted, and we can do this with a right click delete, or we can take the layer and we can drag it down to the garbage can. And when I let go of the left click, it'll disappear. I can duplicate layers. So if I have, for example, on this layer here, I decided I was going to put in something that I don't know if I like that, but something that I liked and I wanted to have that layer duplicated so I could work with it further, I can actually take it and right click the layer, duplicate the layer, give it a new name if I like, and hit OK. I'm going to delete that one there. The other way we could duplicate a layer is go to Layer, Duplicate. And another way we could do it is by selecting the layer and going Control or Command J on the keyboard. And that will duplicate it for us as well. I'm going to delete that one also. When we're working with layers, they can be, I'm going to change the color on this one. When I'm working with layers, you will notice that you'll notice with layers that what is on top is in front of. So if I took that layer with this sort of green-blue color to it, and I decided I was going to move it around, I can do so, and you can see it's in front of the red. If I took the red layer and I dragged it above in the stack, it's going to be in front of as well. So that's kind of important to understand that the stack, how that stack works. Another thing I can do with layers, I'm just going to duplicate this layer a few times, is if I decided I was working with several layers that were kind of related, and I was running into, well, this is getting into too many layers showing up in my stack, I can actually go and group them together. So the third button on the bottom of the layers panel is group. I can give that a name by double clicking it. And then I can open and close that. It's doing nothing other than just making our layers more efficient. Groups can be dragged around as well. And so they become very handy for us as far as organization goes. But naming those layers along the way is also important. With layers, when we're working with many layers, we want to be able to do things like move them or transform them, stuff like that. We can do so, and the move tool is very handy for this. So V on the keyboard for Victor will get us to be able to move things. And then in the move tool, there are some layer specific tools for source properties that we can choose. So auto select is very useful if you're not sure which layer you're on or which one you're trying to work with. I'm just going to move this one around here. This layer I'm just moving with my arrow keys once it's selected. So arrow key held up. And if we're trying to pull out a layer and we have a stack that's really, really full, we can actually go to the move tool, auto select, and we can just click on a portion of our scene that contains what we're trying to grab. And auto select for the move tool will allow us to do that. So when I do that, I can actually just move that particular layer around. And you can see when I click on this portion of the scene, my layer focus goes to that layer. And so I can move these things around very quickly. And that's with auto select. If you don't like that, and there are times where auto select gets a little bit tricky for us, if I wanted to move this red layer around, but I wanted to be able to click and move it from somewhere else, if I turn off auto select, it doesn't matter where in my canvas I choose, that layer will always be the one that is in focus. The next thing with those abilities is, do you want to choose by group or by layer? So if we actually have a group of items, sometimes it's beneficial to be able to click on one of those and it grabs the entire group stack. Whereas if I change that auto select to layer, it'll actually drill down, it'll open up the caret, and we will choose the individual layer that we're working on. Well, that's kind of to do with navigation. If you're ever stuck in working with layers, you can actually right click on one of the layers and you're going to get many more options. Some of them we'll see as we move forward. So being able to do things like color your layers. If I decided this green blue needed to be, let's make that red for some reason, make it blue. That makes more sense. So this doesn't affect your design at all. It's just part of your workflow. We're going to make that red. Right, so visually now you're getting a much quicker way to see things. Talking about being able to see stuff on layers, we have the eyeball. And if you click the eyeball, it turns that layer on or off. You do it to a group, it'll turn that group on or off as well. The other interesting thing you can get with Photoshop here is if you left click and you drag through layers, it will turn those off rather than going click, 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 which will save you a little bit of time. So nice to sort of, what would you say, span across those eyeballs and be able to turn those off. And the last thing we'll talk about here in the layer introduction is just about locking layers. So if you've got the layer, the items set up on your canvas the way you like them, you can actually go in and lock that. You can lock a group, which is very nice to be able to lock. And you can see it's sort of pointing upwards saying the parent of this grouping is locked. And you could go and lock individual layers as well. To unlock, you can click on the padlock while the layer is selected, or click on the padlock on the layer itself. So hopefully that gives you a brief introduction to layers and some of the management of layers, stuff that you need to consider.